next one is Abraham.
Okay, thanks, Peter. I'll get started. Hi, everyone from Atlanta. I'll be presenting on embedded development in Forth, particularly for mobile systems. Here, let me share my screen real quick.
Shit.
Go. Okay. Come on. Okay, can everyone see the Google Slides presentation? Okay, yeah, it's just taking a second to expand for me. Anyway, so Dragon Forth is what I'll be talking about. I've used this for a long time. I think my first experiences with it were in middle school, and I had this $5 Palm, and I wanted to solve the fizz buzz problem just to make sure that my brain was functioning, and then to do other things like I implemented Mastermind and so on. And I knew there was a lot of programming languages that you could use on PalmOS devices, but really that was the simplest to sink my teeth into at the time. Anyway, so I'll go to the next slide. So, why use a dead operating system and a dead platform for development? Well, still with PalmOS devices, there's a lot of tasks that you can do even without a desktop or laptop. I'll stop sharing for a second, come back to this just to show this trio on the right. I'll come back to that in a second. Yeah, so hopefully you can see me now. So this is just on the left is a Trio 755P. It has infrared and as well as Bluetooth and camera and storage and everything. Interestingly enough, what I figured out is with a Bluetooth connection, I can have an internet connection at about 450 kbps, which is slow, but for things like Telnet, SSH, or just looking at simple visualizations or say doing home automation, that's all the speed you need, and the battery life's much better than say the smartphones all of us are using. So even though it's a dead system, it's still valuable. Okay, so I'll go back to the presentation. I just wanted to show that to everyone. And another thing for going back to what Johan mentioned, you can emulate an RPN calculator in there. So if you want to implement algorithms, that's one of many things you can do with it. Anyway, these devices are still very, very common, incredibly inexpensive, and what I'm really interested in doing with them is taking these and putting them to work in Internet of Things contexts. I'm friends with a lot of people with ham radio licenses, and they build this mobile network called APRS, mainly for emergency context, but you can repurpose older computers and even PDAs to send messages over APRS and gather information. So it has just enough power to do that. PalmOS is really lightweight, and it's technically single tasking. There's some multitasking I've seen with particular applications, but it's de facto single tasking. It has network support for TCP/IP, I/O support. It's obviously a GUI, and there's built-in Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, infrared, and serial connections, all that are supported through the system. Because of this, I'd like to use this for real-time data acquisition in some context, communication, like I mentioned, and even visualization. Not, through a Java application or JavaScript in a web browser, but, possibly a native application. I, work in the lab. I'm a graduate student, and knowing whether say a bacterial culture grew up in 6 hours or 12, or knowing the results of the experiments when I'm at home saves a lot of time from day to day. So just getting better at that kind of application would be really useful in my work as well. Anyway, so why use Forth for PalmOS development for this dead platform? Well, there's a lot of options for programming in PalmOS. You can use Lisp. There's Lispme, which is Scheme, but close to Lisp. Python, Pascal, Basic, and then some languages where you'd have to do most of the compiling and development on PC, like C for the most part and J2ME. Forth has the advantage of, as we all know, a really simple syntax, or a syntax that you can define, a vocabulary that you can define yourself, and speed, but you can also make independent programs with the Forth development systems in Palm-OS, which you really can't with, say, Python or Pascal and Palm devices. In addition, both the existing systems, Dragonforth, which is free, and that's based on SP4, I'll talk about today, and Cordisforth have Palm-OS API integration, and you do all the development on board the device. So I had mentioned Free42. There's an RPN calculator emulator for Palm-OS. There's one app that's been developed in Cordisforth that lets you use the infrared port on a Palm-OS device to print to these, which HP calculator fans are probably familiar with, an HP 82248 infrared thermal printer. And the way this app works is it'll take some text that you put in a clipboard. You can adjust it in various ways. It parses the text into the red-eye encoding, and also checks the character set, sets the printing mode, puts that in buffer, then to be sent over infrared, and uses native API calls to control the UART and then set it to the infrared port. And this is just one of many applications that you can still download that was developed with Cordisforth for the Palm-OS platform. Okay, so Dragonforth, then I'll talk about now. This is mainly paraphrased from the manual, but I added some things here. It's ANS compatible. It's based on SP4, but it was also implemented in 68K assembler. Unlike PygMyForth, which I presented in the past, it does both 32-bit and 64-bit arithmetic, and it has floating point support. Although Palm-OS is single tasking, Dragonforth supports multitasking. It works on the 68K Palm-OS versions from 2, with the original Palm Pilots up through 4. You can build PRC executables rapidly and really easily within Dragonforth, and you can clone the system. There's some 1,000 API calls, error messages, and then a direct interface to the math libraries in Palm-OS. These are, typecast, and it supports local variables and dynamic strings. So you can execute within a string that's printed. You can execute particular commands. Okay, so I have one more slide, and then I'll show a quick demo, one of the examples provided, and then point out some of the weaknesses of this system. The development pipeline is, pretty standard for whatever kind of development that you would do on a Palm or elsewhere. You can prepare the code, onboard the device in Metalpad, which is a 4K limit, or a doc editor, which would be longer. You edit resources, say dialog boxes, forms, menus, in RSRC edit, which used to be shareware, but of course this is dead, so you can get that for free. You then open up the Dragonforth console, include the source code, as I'll show you in a second, and then you debug in the console, correct errors, maybe go back to the beginning, or just try out your words in the console. And once you've debugged, you compile a PRC. The weaknesses, so far I see of this, is the documentation isn't very thorough. It's really a learn by making mistakes philosophy, I guess, or just there wasn't enough time to have a really comprehensive manual like you see with Cordisforth. And in addition, as I'll show you in a second, it doesn't seem like the executables work on Palm-OS 5, and that's the newer Palm devices on the ARM platform as opposed to 68K that are 300 megahertz as opposed to 33 or 66. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this, and then I'll try and just share my whole desktop for a quick demo. Okay. Share screen, show all windows. Okay. Can you see all windows now? Oh, you can. Okay. Okay, great. So this is PalmOS simulator. This is emulating a Trio 650p, which is a smartphone similar to what I showed you. Oops, I do need to unlock. There we go. Oops. Okay. And there's, one Dragon compiler and then a console interpreter. I can type in words and then, see the built-in words. There's autocomplete. You can see here, that's for entering in a string. And I'll go ahead and do two examples. One is just a hello world example. You do string hello and then execute the word included. Okay. And yeah, so you have a form, a menu, and you should see a dialog box, but apparently that's an API call that's prior to PalmOS 5, which this is anyway. So that's one issue. Okay, and now I'll just do one more that's a bit more fun than that. Okay, so I'm going to do Conway's Game of Life that they've implemented, and I can also I'll show the one bit of source code after this. So that's a little slow, but always fun. Okay, so I'm just going to show the source code for Hello World if that pops up. Can you see that on the left side of my screen? Excellent. Okay, so this is the Hello World example. The quotes here is just for importing some of the libraries that are in a MemoPad database. It's easy to install. The codes for different resources in the resource file, the about item, main form, and about form that I showed you. One API call, and then when you write the program, the last word that's executed just goes to the main loop of the program. So for the main form, execute that API call on that argument, and then begin. Check to see if a menu event is pressed, like pressing this menu button here, and see if whatever event is equivalent to that. If the event, if its item ID is the about item you picked out, it should drop a dialog box and then get rid of whatever status is put on the stack. And that's really it. All you have to do at the end is call the resources and then use go as your final executable word, and then one more word, build, for creating an executable. It's really fast and easy. Unfortunately, I don't think these executables work on PalmOS 5. I'm trying in the simulator and also on my devices, so I'll see in a few months how Quartus Forth works, and I'll do a presentation on that and hopefully have some more of my own examples. Anyway, so hopefully that's helpful, and let me know if you have any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Abraham, this is a 68K force.
Yeah, so it's implemented in Pila, which is a 68K assembler. There's some emulation on PalmOS 5, but I think the memory model is different, which is why these PRC files don't work. And then there's also API calls that are different. But for the most part, when you execute within the console, it does work even in a Trio or Tungsten, the newer generation, past about, I think the M505 or 515 was the fastest and newest 68K. And then one other thing about that, so some of you might have seen the AlphaSmart Dana. It's a laptop that runs PalmOS. I've modified the resources for the Dragon Forth program so it's widescreen, and you get something like 4.5 times the width, so it's a little easier to see all your code.
Have you compared this force to other compilers, to a C compiler or
as far as speed, I think I haven't compared it for speed with C compilers or with Quartus, but I'll put up the links if anyone's interested. I think there was in Cordis forth some performance benchmarks showing that was much faster than both other, purely interpreted or C compiled programs.
It should be very fast for what you show us.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And you say you've got access to the resources on the Palm computer?
Yeah, so the resource files are just GUI elements that you use in the program, but you also have access to the API, and you could make network calls, so access a TCP/IP stack as well as IR and Bluetooth within the application. Say if you, I don't know, had some text stream at one IP address and you want to interpret the contents of that in the program.
Okay.
Okay, Abraham, I thank you very much for the presentation. It was outstanding. And we chat later on the cafe, on the fourth cafe.
Oh, definitely.
Okay. Yep. Next one is Joe Connor. Where are you, Joe? Are you there? Can you hear me? You are mute. Joe? Joe, is your presentation ready, or shall we pass to another press? He's mute, Joe. Abraham, can you help me with contact Joe?
Sure. Let me go ahead and find Joe in the list of participants. Let's see. Joe
He's
Connor
mute.
asked.
He's mute.
Okay, I'm asking him to unmute. Let's see if I can. I'll chat with him directly. Please unmute.
Hello, Joe. Can you hear us? It's no mic, probably.
So, oh, his microphone's not working.
Oh, no.